I was asked some time ago if I'd like to give a lecture here, and I said, sure, I'd love to. And I was then asked, what would you like to lecture about? And I thought, I don't know, how about murals? So here we are. I'm going to talk about murals. Let me tell you, to start out with, what the lecture is and isn't about. The title is pretty accurate. New York City Murals since 1850, a breathless survey. Over the next hour, what I want to do is give you a survey, a very broad and brisk survey of mural art in New York City. New York, Henry Hope Reed, the great architectural historian, my friend and mentor, loved to say was one of the great classical cities of the world. He said that in certain respects, New York was truly the peer of Paris, Rome, Vienna, Dublin, and St. Petersburg, which were his other choices for the great classical cities of the world. But one of the things that Henry felt, and that I feel, and that probably everyone in this room feels, is that New York is lacking in great murals. That's not to say that there aren't some wonderful murals in New York City, but when you compare New York with the other great classical cities of the world, it is a notable lack. And this is something that I want to sort of be talking about over the next hour, at the same time as I celebrate the few wonderful murals that there are in New York City. So it's going to be a breathless survey. I'm not going to be getting into the nuts and bolts of mural making. So the technical discussion is going to be at a minimum. What I really want to do is sort of alert you to what is out there. And I hope that in so doing, you're going to discover things you didn't know were there. And maybe, just maybe, you're going to see some things in my slides that are going to make you want to get up and leave to go look at that thing in real life. If that's the reason you're getting up to leave in the middle of my talk, that's okay. If there's any other reason you're getting up to leave in the middle of my talk, that is bad. Okay. What else? Definitions, murals. I'm defining it very broadly. A mural is any picture on a wall in a building that is in some more or less definable way integral to the architecture of the building. Everybody defines mural a little bit differently. There are some art historians who object to the use of the word mural for any imagery on a wall which is not painted directly onto the wall. But most of the murals in the United States, at least, are not painted directly on walls. They're painted on some other material, canvas, typically, which is then affixed to the wall. And yet we call them murals. I think that we know murals when we see them without having to resort to some, very specific definition. At the same time, though I'm defining it broadly, I'm going to leave out of my discussion any murals that are not painted murals, because there is this other beast that we call mosaic murals. A lot of the great murals in the United States are actually mosaic, and yet we call them murals. That's another discussion. Those mosaic murals are among the great treasures of the country, but as I say, it's another lecture. And then there's a further distinction to be made between murals and what I'm going to call painted decoration. There is all kinds of painting in our buildings, painted ceilings, this and that, which don't register to us as murals per se, and yet nonetheless are extremely important. And finally, before I sort of begin in earnest, I want to say that what is important to me about murals is that in our experience of buildings, there is nothing, absolutely nothing, in my view, that gives life to a building as murals and, more broadly speaking, painted decoration do. When you see a great mural, a well cared for mural, and care of murals is something that I'll be talking about, it's just a pulse quickening thing, as very few of our experiences of the physical environment are. And I want to see if we can sort of examine this a little bit. I think much more so than sculptural decoration, as exciting as sculptural decoration is. And by the way, New York is far richer in sculptural decoration than we are in painted decoration of buildings. But let's see what we do have in New York. And we'll begin at the beginning. Mural art in the United States, in the view of many, is said to begin with an Italian, a Roman, appropriately enough, named Constantino Brumidi. Brumidi came to America as an adult. He came to America as an already established artist. He attended the Accademia di San Luca. He was a student of Canova and Thorvaldsen. He was an established painter in Rome, in the employ of the Vatican, when, long story short, he got into trouble with the Pope. He was sentenced to 18 years in jail and was given the option of going to America instead. And he sort of weighed the two and decided, oh, I think I'll go to America. And he came here and he sort of had to, start all over again. But he had a background in fresco painting that absolutely no one else in this country had. And at a time when our cities were growing and we were building churches and public buildings that cried out for decoration, he had an early monopoly in the field. Thus, St. Stephen's Church. I don't know how many of you know this church. It's now closed. But it was once the largest Roman Catholic church in the United States. The building is still there on East 28th Street. But anyway, it was a major parish in the Archdiocese of New York. And in 1854, Brumidi was hired to paint murals in this church. Something I should have said by now. So let me just stop and say it. Murals are damnably difficult to photograph. I mean, they really are. Because you want to get a photograph that kind of shows it in its setting, that gives you a sense of what this painted surface is like in relation to the overall architecture, rather than just an image of the painted surface itself, which could be anything, anywhere. For that reason, it's really, really hard. Our experience of murals also, much like our experience of sculpture, which is also very difficult to photograph, involves seeing it from different perspectives. It's an environmental thing. It's not something that you just view head on as you might a framed picture on a gallery wall. It's a very different animal. Thus, I'm making an excuse for just how frustrating some of these photos are going to be. Anyway, there are murals throughout St. Stephen's Church by Brumidi, but this crucifixion scene right behind the main altar is the best known of them. This is St. Stephen's Church, by the way, a Romanesque revival church designed by James Renwick Jr. If there's anything that you know Brumidi for, of course, it's the work that he did at the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. The apotheosis of Washington in the Capitol Dome is one of the most celebrated works of art in the United States. And when Brumidi was hired to do this, it was in part because nobody else could have done it at the time. Not only could he do it, but he was exceptionally well-versed in fresco technique. This was an immensely well-trained Italian artist. He wasn't flying by the seat of his pants. He actually knew what he was doing, and this enormous fresco in the Capitol Rotunda is, as I say, quite celebrated. It is, as so many of Brumidi's works were during this time, combination of bits and pieces of American history together with classical allegory. And this was how many people thought of the sort of American project, if you will, throughout the 19th century, and it still can be a very powerfully moving thing. It is to me, at any rate. There we are. I mean, this is really kind of amazing stuff by Brumidi. He didn't finish it. I mean, he'd like, this was a lifetime's work, the Capitol Dome. And it was left unfinished at the time that Brumidi died. One of his assistants, Filippo Costagini, continued the work after Brumidi's death, but this wasn't actually finished until 1953 by the painter Alan Cox, who was the son of Kenyon Cox. There are many other murals by Brumidi in the Capitol. Robert Fulton, this is a beautiful image of Robert Fulton in the Senate wing. Columbia welcoming the South back into the Union. Thus far, nobody's asked for this to be removed. I think simply because they don't know it's there. And don't tell anyone. Now, this is another big Catholic church in New York, Holy Innocents on West 37th Street, and there was a mural behind the altar there, from the time the church opened, and it became, over the years, extremely dirty and faded, and nobody really thought very much of it until a member of the congregation who was an art historian got the idea that maybe this was more interesting than anybody was giving it credit for being, and he examined it and he brought in some friends, and it was determined, lo and behold, it was a Brumidi. And a campaign was started to raise the money to restore it, and recently it has been restored. So we have in New York, it turns out, not just the St. Stephen's Brumidis, but also Holy Innocents, and it's very similar. It's a crucifixion scene, a very dramatic crucifixion scene behind the altar, but it is indeed quite beautiful. Now, a lot of murals in New York are in churches. I'm not going to overdo the churches. There's a recent book, and a very good book, out about New York murals, which completely neglects church murals, which I found a little bit odd. But one of the most celebrated murals in New York City is the Ascension mural in Church of the Ascension. How many of you know this? By John Lafarge. Only a couple of you raised your hands. This church is very accessible. It's on 5th Avenue and 10th Street. It's open a lot of the time. So if you're in the Village and you're interested in, painting. You might want to just go by Church of the Ascension and see if it's open. Odds are it will be. And really, this mural, again, difficult to photograph, will, in real life, I guarantee you, knock your socks off. Lafarge, as you know, was probably the sort of most important multi-talented artist of late 19th century America. He was the great innovator in stained glass. Tiffany, whom I regard as a genius, nonetheless borrowed, to put it politely, much of what he did from Lafarge. Lafarge's stained glass work is really as fine as it gets. Opalescent glass, you can see wonderful examples, not only in churches in New York, but in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and so on. But he was also an outstanding painter. He did a lot of easel painting of a very high quality, but also murals. He was one of the decorators of Trinity Church in Boston, and at Church of the Ascension, which was an 1840s Gothic revival church, he was one of the decorators of its extensive interior remodeling done under the direction of Stanford White in 1888, for which Lafarge contributed this immense altar mural on the theme of, taken from the church's name, the Ascension. And it has just a wonderful sort of almost mystical quality to it. The sculptural work that you see, by the way, surrounding it is by the brothers Augustus and Louis St. Gaudens. And this is Lafarge, in case anybody at the Grand Central Atelier wants to know what an artist should look like. This is it. A wonderful portrait of Lafarge in the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. Speaking of Lafarge, John Lafarge's son, an architect named Christopher Grant Lafarge, who for many years was a partner in a firm called Hines and Lafarge, designed a magnificent church in Washington, D.C., St. Matthew's Cathedral, the Roman Catholic Cathedral in Washington, which is one of the most brilliantly decorated buildings in the country, particularly its murals. And although I said I wasn't going to talk about mosaic murals, I lied. These are mosaic murals by an artist named Edwin Howland Blashfield. And it is with Blashfield that we enter into what we may call the golden age of mural painting in America, which is dominated by a handful of giant figures. There is Blashfield, there is Siddons Mowbray, there is Ezra Winter, and there is Maxfield Parrish. Those four I regard as the big four. So you might want to jot down their names. Blashfield, above all. Blashfield is to American mural painting what, I don't know, St. Gaudens is to our sculpture, or what McKim, Mead, and White are to our architecture. He's sort of like the name above all the other names. And I love his pendentive murals in St. Matthew's so much that I thought I would just show, some nice pictures of them to introduce the theme of this man, Edwin Howland Blashfield, whose many virtues extend to his having been born in Brooklyn. Of all places. And he went to MIT, and then he went to Paris. He studied under William Morris Hunt. Then he went to Paris, where he entered the atelier of Léon Bonnot, who was a very important teacher in France, would later teach for many, many years at the École des Beaux-Arts. And his students included John Singer Sargent, Thomas Eakins, Gustav Caillebotte, Edvard Munch, Georges Braque. An incredible legacy for a teacher. And here he's shown in a painting by one of his students, Marie Garet. This is what art school used to look like. You had to like wear a tie. But anyway, he was Blashfield's principal teacher. Now, Blashfield was based in New York, and he did a certain amount of work here, but really he did work all across the country, and it's part of the sad fate of New York City that Blashfield's greatest work is to be found somewhere other than New York City. A lot of his work in New York has been destroyed. For instance, he did the ceiling mural of the ballroom of the old Waldorf Astoria on Fifth Avenue and 35th Street, which was demolished in 1929 when the Empire State Building was built. But if you just want the very quick survey of Blashfield's work, the reading room ceiling of the Library of Congress, which is spectacular. He did the mural painting in the Iowa State Capitol, which is, yes, Iowa?
I've seen that painting in person. It's phenomenal.
Now, are you from Iowa?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Oh, okay. Yeah. Phenomenal, right? Yeah, it's Westward, it's called. And really, it is a beautiful painting by Blashfield. Here is a detail from it. You just, until you drive around the Midwest, you don't know what you're missing. He did the Rotunda mural in the Wisconsin, Iowa and Wisconsin? See, I knew that. That's why I put these two slides together. Anyone from Jersey City? Oh, all right, okay. Okay. The Hudson County Courthouse in Jersey City has pendentives by Blashfield. Now, in New York City, what's left by Blashfield? Well, there's this at City College. It's in Shepherd Hall, City College. All right. Well, this is your life. We'll see what else turns up. Do you know this painting? Yeah. It is. Oh yeah, Shepherd Hall is like one of the 10 greatest buildings in New York, in my opinion. And this painting I love the fact that it's called The Graduate. So it's like Benjamin Braddock and Mrs. Robinson. That's how I think of them. Some of you may be too young. Okay. And then also in New York is this by Blashfield, a memorial to his wife, who was a really remarkable woman, one of the founders of the Municipal Art Society in 1893. And this fountain at Bridge Market under the Queensboro Bridge, on the Manhattan side of the bridge, it's a mosaic, but it's very beautiful and one of the later works of Blashfield. Now, Blashfield was one of several artists who contributed to the interior of the Appellate Division Courthouse on Madison Avenue and 25th Street. How many of you know this building? Those of you who do not know this building, you must get to know it this weekend. Because it's really just one of the great extravaganzas of New York architecture. When this courthouse was built in 1900, designed by James Brown Lord, the decision was made to devote, I'm not kidding, people, 30% of its budget went to art. Sculpture and painting, 30%. That is unheard of. And the results speak for themselves. This is after, the New York Public Library, maybe the greatest Beaux-Arts building in New York City. The courtroom, what's that?
Sorry, is that still an appellate court?
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah.
It's open to the public?
Yes, it is. Open to the public. Now, you can, you can go there while court is in session and be a spectator, which is an awesome thing because, appellate courts are like important places. It's like going to the Supreme Court almost. And when court's not in session, the guard will let you into the courtroom, this courtroom. All right, look at that. The stained glass dome by Maitland Armstrong will let you in on a discretionary basis, meaning if he thinks you don't look like you're going to set off a bomb, he'll let you in. I don't know about you. It's, but anyway, just kidding. But that's the best because I've gone there and the guards let me in and I've just sort of like wandered around in there by myself. And the walls are covered in murals. This is by Siddons Mowbray, whom you'll see more of later. Kenyon Cox. Willard Leroy Metcalf. Robert Reed, and Edward Emerson Simmons. And Blashfield is there as well, and Henry O. Walker. It really is, like I said, an extravaganza. And that's not even to mention the sculpture, which is just, Daniel Chester French and Carl Bitter and Philip Martini and so on. It really is pretty spectacular. So you owe it to yourself to go there. This is a detail of the Simmons showing the baby and the bunny rabbit. And this is the foyer just outside the courtroom. The courtroom is to your right. And it has a long mural frieze by Siddons Mowbray called Transmission of the Law. And here you see a little detail. Now, Siddons Mowbray was an American artist born to American painters in Alexandria, Virginia. Jesus, did I just say that? Alexandria, Egypt. What a strange thing for me to have said. Egypt. And then he came to this country, and as a young man, went to Paris, where he studied under Léon Bonnat, the same teacher that Blashfield had, only it was about 20 years after Blashfield that Mowbray studied with him. He came back to New York and he got a lot of very big commissions, including the Pierpont Morgan Library. Now, this building by Charles McKim is so icily elegant on the outside. It really has kind of a little bit of the feeling of a mausoleum, right? I don't mean that in a bad way. I love mausoleums. But this is kind of mausoleum-esque until you step inside. And then it just is almost it's almost too much. I mean, every surface of the interior of this building. And by the way, there are only 4 rooms in the whole building, one of which is the library itself. Here are just so richly decorated by Harry Siddons Mowbray, who did the mural painting and worked with the architects on the other painted decoration. But here you see how many of you have been here in this room? Okay, I am not surprised because it's open whenever the Morgan Library and Museum is open, and you can really sort of hang out in this room and photograph it freely. At least I've never been stopped when I've photographed. What's that? In the Morgan? In this room? I've never been stopped. Oh, you can't draw, but you can photograph. I'm just. They told you couldn't draw? Get out, really? Oh, man. Oh. Oh, okay, I see. I thought you said they didn't allow drawing. Oh, they let you draw. Oh, okay. Huh. I've never had a problem. Oh. Oh. Well, anyway, it's pretty awesome. Mowbray also did the library of the University Club. If you go to any of the Institute of Classical Architecture has 2 major annual events at the University Club, the Arthur Ross Awards and the McKim Lecture. And if you happen to go to either one of those, you really should take the opportunity. This is unless you're a University Club member. You should take the opportunity to, look around. They don't want you to do that when you're there for an event in the dining room, but, you can get away with it pretty easily. And you should go to the library particularly because it's a stunning room, a series of painted vaults, again, by Siddons Mowbray. The next big name is Maxfield Parrish. Everybody here knows from Maxfield Parrish, right? Philadelphia born, a Quaker. In a lot of ways, maybe second in general public fame among American artists of his generation, only to Norman Rockwell. That said, his work is very different from Rockwell's. Whereas Rockwell was a kind of realist, Parrish was a classicist. And his work has always a kind of fanciful, sometimes mythological aspect to it, which one does not find in Rockwell's work. Both of them were very famous as illustrators. Parrish was one of the richest artists, by which I mean money riches, that this country ever produced. I mean, he just made money hand over fist. But he didn't make it from his murals. It was from his illustrations. Nonetheless, he did do murals, and they were things perfect of their kind. In New York, of course, there is old King Cole and his Fiddlers 3 in the King Cole Bar of the St. Regis Hotel. This was originally in the Knickerbocker Hotel. 1906 is its date. Then, when the Knickerbocker Hotel closed, it reopened like a few years ago, but it closed back around 1930. And then this mural was relocated to another hotel owned by the same guy, Vincent Astor, called the St. Regis on 5th Avenue and 55th Street, and installed over the bar, and it's been there since. A couple of years ago, it was restored, and it's well worth going to that bar to see this. You might want to go to the bar just to look at it because a glass of wine is $30. But it is, as I say, well worth seeing. Henry Hope Reed felt that this was the finest, one of the finest murals in the United States, but the very finest in New York, he thought, and I think, and some other people think, are to be found in the Cunard building. Anyone? Cunard building? Who's been in it? Steve has been in it. Well, you know, if you're not of a certain age, you probably haven't been in it because it's been closed for years. Just scanning this audience, most of you were like toddlers when it was last open. This was the ticketing office of the Cunard lines. This is at 25 Broadway, Bowling Green. And the space, this ticketing office, is the same size as the main concourse of Grand Central Terminal. And it's even more awe-inspiring. After Cunard, you know, became a thing of the past, this became a post office. And, you know, the U.S. Postal Service came in with all their, like, modern space frame installations, and they were, like, horrible, but they didn't do anything to, like, cover up the ceiling or the frescoes or anything, so you could still go in and see it and appreciate it. But then the post office moved out, and it's now like a catering hall, and they won't let you in. And you know, it's off limits. It's a designated interior landmark, but you can't get in. Open House New York. It was open on Open House New York Day. I don't know if it is every year. It was on this last one. Anyway, this space is simply unbelievable. I mean, you know, if you think of the great grand interiors of New York, nothing really approaches this for color or for painted decoration. What it has particularly are these frescoes, true fresco by Ezra Winter, showing great voyages in history, Cunard lines, you know, steamships. So it's all nautical stuff and boating history and what have you. These are just beautiful, beautiful paintings that have stood up very well over time. And as I say, fresco. Ezra Winter did the Canterbury Tales murals in the Library of Congress, which just like go on forever, but which are very beautiful. And he was, Winter sort of rounds out the big four. So you have Edwin Blashfield, H. Siddons Mowbray, Maxfield Parrish, Ezra Winter. Anyone here who's thinking of being a mural painter or is a mural painter? Anybody here paint murals? All right. Well, Ezra Winter, you know, died in 1943. He shot himself. And the reason he did was because a couple of years earlier, he was working on a mural. And he was high up on scaffolding. And he fell. And the resulting paralysis left him unable to paint. And he couldn't live with that, and so shot himself. Oh, okay. So be careful up there. A very, very sad story. Now, as we move ahead in the 1920s, when you think, oh, everything must have been Art Deco, not so at all. It was a very diverse decade artistically in New York. And these wonderful murals were done for the lobby ceiling of the Sherry Netherland Hotel. Only many people didn't know about them until 2013 because they had been painted over for years. They'd been whitewashed. And they were finally restored by Evergreen. I mean, Evergreen Studios does so much wonderful work in restoring painted decoration. They deserve every award there is. They deserve the Nobel Peace Prize. But they completely restored these murals by a very little-known artist named Joseph Arruta. I defy you to find out anything about Joseph Arruta in 2013. And they're, as I say, very, very nice and easy to see. You can just step into the Sherry Netherland. Yeah, I always have to point that out because so many New York buildings are difficult of access these days. Back when I first moved to New York, nobody cared where you went, really, nobody. You could go anywhere and anytime, but not so nowadays. So it's worth pointing out when you can just walk into a building. That said, the 20s did also bring us Art Deco. And Art Deco was sort of the last of the dominant styles in American art and architecture that was also highly ornamental. And mural painting was certainly not neglected. The greatest Art Deco interior on earth, in my own opinion, is the lobby of the Chrysler Building. And integral to its success is its painted ceiling by Edward Trumbull. The ceiling paintings collectively are called Energy, Result, Workmanship, and Transportation. As I say here, 97 feet by 110 feet, very muted in color as they need to be in order to work in this environment, this very, very interesting lobby. One of the things you find in the ceiling is a depiction of the Chrysler building itself, but if you look closely at these paintings, you will see an amazing amount of sort of activity and human figures. Now, I'm going to talk just a little bit about the Federal Art Project of the 1930s during the Great Depression, when the federal government sought to aid artists. I think there are a lot of artists today who look back on this and think, my God, what a different world that was from today. I mean, if we had an economic calamity today, would the government in Washington think to set up a program to employ artists? I mean, there were many artists in the 1930s who got work through the Federal Art Project who, had never had work before. I mean, it's not like it was artists who were working and then were out of work and then got work again. I mean, you know what it's like to be an artist. You know, this was like a boon for artists. And the number of murals that were painted across America in the 1930s dwarfs any other decade in our history because of the Federal Art Project. This is not one of those. But as we work our way into that subject, I wanted to introduce the king of painted decoration. That is Elmer Ellsworth Garnsey. Be honest, how many of you know the name? Anyone in the room? Safe to say that none of you know the name Elmer Ellsworth Garnsey. Henry Hope Reed felt that Garnsey that his name should be as well known as that of Stanford White. The reason being that Garnsey was a decorator whom many of the top architects of the Beaux-Arts era hired to work out many details of decoration, particularly, though not exclusively, painted decoration, to develop color schemes for building interiors. He did all kinds of miscellaneous jobs. And in the end, he really, Henry felt, proved himself the author of these buildings as much as their architects did, because so much of what we experience in these buildings is something that Garnsey developed, that Garnsey put in. So, for example, you find in the Library of Congress, where he was in charge of color. That was his job. He also did a lot of sort of the miscellaneous, or could call them infill, murals that are to be found throughout that building. And in New York, he worked with Cass Gilbert on the Custom House, where he did paintings like the ones over the mantels in the collector's office, but also did all of the miscellaneous painted decoration of the vaults, for instance, such as you see in this picture. This is Elmer Ellsworth Garnsey. So an important name that you should try to remember. This is the building that Garnsey worked on, the Custom House at Bowling Green, Cass Gilbert, architect, 1907. But when you think of murals and you think of this building, what you think of are the murals in the rotunda of this building, which are true fresco, dry fresco. Superb works by an artist named Reginald Marsh. But note the date, 1937. The spaces were always meant to bear paintings. But you know what? A great building is built, it's decorated, the sculptural decoration is carried out. The last thing is always the painting. And sometimes it's not till 30 years later when, as part of the Federal Art Project, Marsh was hired to finally do the murals in this amazing room. And they are collectively on the theme of an ocean liner entering New York Harbor. Marsh and his assistants, you can get a sense looking at this picture of the extent of the job. This is a gigantic room that we're talking about. Again, think concourse of Grand Central Terminal, right? Huge space. Marsh and his handful of assistants actually did all these paintings in something like 7 weeks. It was just pretty amazing. But very nice. How many of you have been to see these? Okay. You collectively, you should all get around more. Just saying. Okay. Now, Marsh also did murals in the Post Office Department building in Washington, D.C., what's now called the William Jefferson Clinton Office Building, sorting the mail, which you never thought was so heroic until you saw Marsh's painting. But there you have it. It's very beautiful. Marsh, as you know, is one of the best-known American painters of his generation. One of the things, he was sort of you could call him neo-Ashcan, but one of the things about Marsh which is notable is how much he despised modern art, particularly abstraction, and really sought to defy the trends until finally he kind of just went away. People stopped writing about him. But his works are to be found in museums. The Met has this painting, the Bowery, and so on. And this is back at the Custom House. Now, another artist who did work through the Federal Art Project was an Italian, a Milanese, named Atelier who, again, like Brumidi, was an established and fairly well-known artist in Italy, in Pusterla's case in Milan, but came to the United States and through the Federal Art Project, got the commission to do murals in the New York County Courthouse, the grand classical courthouse by Guy Lowell on Bowling Green. And this is a detail from his Rotunda mural. But in one of the jury rooms, he painted the central image here, which is this image, is also by Pusterla. And in case you were wondering, this is one of his paintings in the Galleria d'Arte Moderna in Milan. He loved to he was sort of like a Milan's Ashcan painter. He loved to paint pictures of working class life in Milan, and they are quite marvelous. I just thought I'd throw this in because he did the Astoria column. Has anybody by any chance seen the Astoria column in Astoria, Oregon? This was put up by Vincent Astor in honor of his great-grandfather, John Jacob Astor, who was the founder of the town of Astoria, Oregon. And it depicts scenes from the history of Oregon, all painted by Pusterla. This is 1926. And, you know, there you have it. There are Lewis and Clark and Jefferson, and it's the whole history of Oregon wrapping around this giant column. It's a curious thing. The 1930s also gave us private work. We're getting on towards the end, just in case you're wondering. You all know the story of Diego Rivera and Rockefeller Center, right? Diego Rivera, who was a very well-known painter in the 1930s, though today he's celebrated chiefly for being the husband of Frida Kahlo, was a particular favorite of Abby Aldrich Rockefeller, one of the founders of the Museum of Modern Art and the wife of the richest man in America, John D. Rockefeller Jr., which is why Rivera was hired, in spite of his known communism and all of that, to paint a rather spectacular mural in the lobby of 30 Rockefeller Center in 1932. And as you also probably know, when it was discovered that he had incorporated into this painting a portrait of Lenin, was asked to remove it, refused to remove it, with the result that his mural was destroyed. He then recreated the mural for the Palace of Fine Arts in Mexico City, where you can see it today. This is what it looks like, and this was what was supposed to be over the main information desk in 30 Rockefeller Plaza. Instead, a painter, a Spaniard, well, actually from Barcelona, Sert, was hired, and no chance of Lenin popping up here because Sert was a dedicated follower of Francisco Franco. So no communists, please. Maybe a communist being hanged. But no, we got these murals in this very monochrome palette entitled American Progress, and you've all seen these, right? What do you think of them? Those of you who've seen them. Thumbs up, thumbs down. What's that?
That's a good slide to represent them.
Okay. But you're not going to tell me what you think of them.
Well, I guess the monochrome is strange, but I mean, I like the monumentality of them for sure.
Okay. All right. Okay. Little creepy? Yeah. Yeah, he's kind of creepy. Okay. There's other mural art in Rockefeller Center. Our man Ezra Winter, remember him? Fell off the scaffold, shot himself. He did Fountain of Youth. How many of you have seen this in Radio City Music Hall? There we are. This is late Ezra Winter. This is very different from what he did in the Cunard building, but it's very Chinese, very vivid in its colors. More federal art project stuff, Harlem Hospital, Georgette Seabrook, a 19-year-old African-American woman, was hired to do, she was 19 when she did the murals in Harlem Hospital. Sorry. This is WPA stuff also in the American Museum of Natural History. I meant to take those out.
Who did those murals?
In the American Museum of Natural History?
Dean Cornwell?
Huh?
Was it Cornwell?
No, it wasn't Cornwell. I'm forgetting right off who it was, but it wasn't Cornwell. Yeah. But Frederick Starr's murals in Staten Island Borough Hall, RWPA, showing scenes from the history of Staten Island, which never looked so good as it does in these pictures. But here's one of my favorites, and we're near the end. This is another Italian. Have you noticed how many Italians are part of this story? That's because Italians are born knowing how to paint murals. This is Vincente Aderente, this case a Neapolitan, who came to this country and was principal assistant to Edwin Blashfield for many years. He worked with Blashfield on almost all of Blashfield's major commissions. Then, in the 1930s, Aderente was given a federal art project job to paint murals in the Flushing post office. And he did them on the theme of the early settlement of different Queens neighborhoods. These are one of the great treasures of New York that nobody knows about. I mean, who's been to the Flushing post office, right? Nobody has. But there they are. This is Jackson Heights. This is Woodside. Woodside again. I mean, you never think of Woodside looking like that. This is Elmhurst, Forest Hills with cattle. These are great. I mean, they're beautifully painted. They work well in the space, and they really tell a story. Aderente was, like so many muralists, also an illustrator. He did this Army recruiting poster in 1917, and this is a mural that he did for Kings County Hospital Center. This is also WPA in East Flatbush, called Enlightenment, much more classical than the works in the Flushing post office. Very interesting artist named Kindred McCleary, who did not have a long life, died when he was 48, did really interesting murals in the Madison Square Station post office on East 23rd Street, which is one of the great buildings of the 1930s, in my opinion, both outside and in. And the last two things. James Brooks, known as sort of upper second tier abstract expressionist painter. Very close friend of Jackson Pollock. They were roommates at one time. Was hired, again, this was federal art project, to do the murals in the Marine Air Terminal at LaGuardia Airport. Anyone seen these? Okay. The name of collectively is Flight. And this is what murals by an abstract expressionist look like. when he's trying to be a little bit less abstract. These are well-liked murals. People really like these. They, sort of have a kind of Art Deco / Art Moderne jauntiness to them. And it's interesting to compare them, speaking of Dean Cornwell, with Dean Cornwell's similarly themed History of Transportation, only 4 years later in the Eastern Airlines building of Rockefeller Center. If anything, Cornwell's work, Cornwell was not an abstract painter. He was a figurative painter. Funnily enough, his mural seems more abstract than the abstract painter Brooks's mural on a similar theme. Restaurants are a place to find murals in New York. The over-the-top murals by the illustrator Howard Chandler Christie in Café des Artistes, which is no longer. It's a new restaurant. The murals are still there. It's called The Leopard, the restaurant. You can go in and look at them, but don't eat there. Okay. Back in the day when it was Café des Artistes, it was a great restaurant. And you had the murals of these. They're all over the restaurant. There's these cavorting naked women. Ludwig Bemelmans of Madeline fame did the murals in the Bemelmans bar. The Italian Sandro Chia did the murals in Palio Restaurant on West 51st Street, which are very colorful. The New Yorker cartoonist Edward Sorel did the murals in the Waverly Inn on Bank Street and Waverly Place, sort of very exuberant murals showing a range of Greenwich Village personalities. Look closely enough and you'll find a portrait of Jane Jacobs. And finally, to get to something a little bit more contemporary, 1987 to 92, how many of you have seen these Craig McPherson murals? How many of you know Craig McPherson's work? He kind of got lumped in for a while with the photorealists, but I don't think he belongs among them. Little bit Rackstraw Downs-ish because he did a lot of very dramatic cityscapes, but he's a contemporary realist painter who got an enormous commission. I mean, anyone here would just die for this commission. The American Express building in the World Financial Center. I mean, really, American Express hires you to do a 318-foot-long mural? I mean, you've died and gone to heaven. Anyway, he acquitted himself. His theme is Harbors of the World, and this is open to the public. It's in the lobby. It's one of the buildings of the World Financial Center, now called Brookfield Place. You can go there. The guards will let you look at these to your heart's content. Very nice they are about it, too. These cityscapes, there's New York, are exquisitely detailed and just beautifully done. It's very, you can see, frustrating to photograph them, but you can see why, he kind of got the photorealist tag put on him. But the works are very interesting, and they show us that although we may not be living in the golden age of mural painting now, we may not be living with the benefits of the Federal Art Project in the 1930s, nonetheless, mural painting isn't dead. There are patrons, in this case American Express, who are still willing to pay for it, and there are artists, in this case Craig McPherson, who are capable of doing it, and let us hope that here is Istanbul. This is nice stuff, and there's back to New York for my 123rd and final slide. Anyway, these are worth looking at. And if you haven't seen them, do so. Thank you very much.